And we'll look at the Federal Election Commission's enforcement of campaign laws. That's on tomorrow morning's Washington Journal at 7 a.m. Eastern. Now the House is coming back in for votes on a couple of measures debated earlier today.
62 de novo. The first electronic vote will be conducted as a 15-minute vote. Remaining electronic votes will be conducted as 5-minute votes. The unfinished business is the vote on adoption of House Resolution 537, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk reports the title of the resolution.
House Calendar Number 109, House Resolution 537, Resolution providing for consideration of the bill, H.R. 1734, to decrease the deficit by realigning, consolidating, selling, disposing, and improving the efficiency of federal buildings and other civilian real property and for other purposes.
The question is on adoption of the resolution. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. Members will record their votes by electronic vote. This will be a 15-minute vote.
A couple of votes in this series. This one on the rule that will set the guidelines for debate on a bill that sets up a commission to make recommendations on what to do with certain federal non-military properties. The aim is to reduce the inventory of federal properties and cut costs. In addition to live House and Senate coverage, tomorrow we'll hear from Republican presidential candidates Mitt Romney in Denver and Rick Santorum in St. Charles, Missouri, as results come in from the Republican caucuses in Colorado and Minnesota and the primary in Missouri. That's here on C-SPAN tomorrow night after 10 p.m. Eastern. And tomorrow morning at 10 Eastern, Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke will testify before the Senate Budget Committee about the economy. We'll have that live on C-SPAN 3. We spoke with a reporter looking ahead to tomorrow when the House will debate a measure to give the President line-item veto authority. House Republicans have been moving a handful of bills aimed at overhauling the budget process. First up this week is a legislative line-item veto bill. Eric Wasson, a staff writer for The Hill, how would it work?
Well, this is an interesting piece of legislation, a line-item veto, a true one, in which the President would be able to strike individual provisions of an appropriations bill that was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in the 1990s. Interestingly, the old Southern Confederacy Constitution had that, but the U.S. Constitution has never allowed the President to have that. And instead, this bill would create a similar situation where the President could ask Congress within 45 days of an appropriations bill being passed to rescind certain items. And he'll list those items out, and then that request would have an up or down vote. And that's very important because it couldn't be filibustered in the Senate or blocked in any other way. And so it's sort of a fast-track procedure. That's basically what it's called, what it is. It's entitled the Legislative Line-Item Veto Act.
So why do supporters of the bill say it's necessary?
Well, this is sort of to combat, right now we have a temporary moratorium on earmarks, but, if that were ever to go away, and so far it's proved impossible to pass a permanent ban on earmarks. Senators Toomey and McCaskill had an amendment to the Stock Act, the insider trading bill that came up in the Senate last week, to permanently ban all earmarks, and that was defeated. So, for example, with earmarks, if the President had that ability, he could take the earmarks and list them and put it before the Senate and sort of put some sunshine on that and, potentially embarrass members of both houses for putting that in the bill and have those struck. But also, it just would, supporters just say it would tend to cut down on wasteful spending that's unnecessary. And you certainly see that a lot in the Pentagon budget. I mean, repeatedly, the Pentagon asked for certain weapon systems and other appropriations to be canceled or scaled back. But, powerful members in Congress tend to defend those programs and add more money than the Pentagon wants.
You mentioned the President. He's set to release his annual budget request to Congress next week. How is it expected to be received by lawmakers?
Well, it will depend on the party, of course. It's going to be a really political fight. As I and my colleague Molly Hooper wrote in today's edition of The Hill, it's going to set up a big rematch of last year's battles between the House Republicans and the White House over the budget. Basically, what we expect is that President Obama will put a little more flesh on the bones of his recommendations to the Super Committee of how to cut about $4 trillion from the deficit over 10 years. This would be through a combination of new revenue and spending cuts. But it's not expected to do very much on long-term entitlement reform, and this is where the House Republicans will come back with probably a revised version of their Medicare plan, which would ultimately offer a type of privatized system for some future seniors.
Eric Wasson is a staff writer for The Hill. Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much.
That line item veto bill is expected to come up on the House floor tomorrow. And also, later in the week, legislation that would make changes in budget accounting, requiring debt from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to be included in calculating the whole federal debt. The U.S. closed its embassy in Damascus today over safety concerns. Here are some details from the State Department spokesman Victoria Nuland.
On Embassy Damascus, we all saw your notice this morning. I'm just wondering if you can tell us what that means for the state of communication between the U.S. government and the Assad regime, given that Ambassador Ford is now no longer in Damascus, presumably no longer able to at least directly confer with either regime officials or opposition. Does that mean that we're cutting a line of communication? How are you going to keep those open?
Well, first, as we notified this morning, we have concluded that we need to suspend operations at our embassy in Damascus in light of the fact that we have security concerns about the safety of our personnel. As you know, we had been working for many weeks with Syrian officials to try to control access around our embassy facility. We were not able to come to appropriate arrangements there, so the decision was made to suspend operations. Ambassador Ford and the remaining personnel departed the country Damascus time this morning, and the flag's been taken down. We have asked our ally Poland, and Poland has agreed to be our protecting power in Damascus, so big thanks to Warsaw for that. So any remaining American citizens in Syria who haven't heeded our repeated travel warnings, which were updated again today, can receive consular services through the Embassy of Poland.
Okay, but the question was, how are you going to maintain lines of communication with the Assad regime, given that you don't have anybody on the ground?
So after a brief little break in Europe, where he's going to meet up with his wife, who he hasn't seen for a while, Ambassador Ford will be coming home. He will set up shop here as head of our Syria team. The expectation, as our announcement said earlier today, was that Ambassador Ford will continue to maintain the contacts that he has broadly across Syrian society, but particularly with Syrian opposition, as will the Secretary's Special Advisor Fred Hoff, who works with Syrians outside of the country, so that we can maintain contacts, so that we can make sure that the Syrian people know that we stand with them in their desire for a democratic future.
Well,
and when you have to
also been evacuated, will they also be working out of this makeshift office here at State in the interim?
A number of them will be reassigned. We have a pretty big staff already here in the department, but we will have those that we need to maintain the business will be working here. Yeah.
You didn't mention anything about when contacts need to be made with the Syrian authorities, whether an American is detained or any other reason. How will that go solely now through the protecting power, or will those contacts be maintained from here as well?
Well, the Syrian embassy in Washington remains open at the level of the chargé as necessary, particularly having to do with security issues. As you know, in the past we have done business with the chargé. We can also, the Polish protecting power obviously will do the business in the way that the Swiss do for us in Iran, etc.
Have you received assurances from the Syrian government that your property will be protected in your absence, or do you expect it to be ransacked in the next 72 hours or something like that?
Well, before departing the country today, Ambassador Ford did go in and see Foreign Minister Mwalem to formalize our decision to suspend, inform him, and also to make clear that we expect that the remaining Vienna Convention obligations that they have to our property, etc., will be respected, and to formally make clear that the government of Poland will be our protecting power. So our expectation is that our property will be protected, and the hope is, as I said, this is a suspension, and when there are better days in Damascus, we'll be able to reopen.
This is their first conversation in quite some time, I imagine.
I'm not sure the answer to that. I know that when this issue of requiring a hardening of the embassy and the streets around it first came up in December, they had at least one direct conversation, and Ambassador Ford has been in a number of times since to talk to Foreign Minister Mwalam's deputies, but I don't think that in a couple of weeks they've had a direct conversation.
Did they speak about the violence at all, about the fighting, the homes, Hama?
My understanding, and I don't have a full readout on that conversation, is that it was relatively pro forma, business-like. We don't think that the Syrian government has any questions about where we stand on these issues, particularly given the President's statement over the weekend about the violence and the strong comments that the Secretary had, both in Munich and in Sofia, strong statements from Ambassador Rice in New York over the weekend. Please.
Victoria, can you elaborate a little bit about the nature of the threat? Some news reports have said that it's directly linked to Al-Qaeda. Is this precisely the threat, or are you talking about general things that emanate from other groups? Some even talk about President Assad released some fighters who's going to Iraq and they might be linked to Al-Qaeda.
Nicole, have a seat. There's room down here. Oh, she's being modest and sitting over there. Well, I'm not going to get into details of our security assessment beyond saying, as we say in the statement that we released today, our concern is that the situation in and around Damascus is becoming increasingly violent, reflecting the fact that the regime is increasingly losing control of the situation because it itself has resorted to violence rather than dialogue with its own people. Our embassy facility, for those of you who know Damascus, is right at the confluence of many main streets. It has no protection or setback to speak of. I will say, Nadia, that for almost 20 years, the U.S. government has been petitioning the government of Syria to be able to move the embassy to have a plot of land elsewhere that was better protected, as we have for many of our missions, and we were never able to come to an agreement on that. So this is obviously regrettable and not what we wanted, but where we are.
Just to follow up quickly, I know that you're talking about a security threat, but some saying that basically Arab states now should close their embassies in Damascus as a measure to step up pressure on President Assad. Would you encourage that?
Well, a number of Arab states have already taken that measure. You remember that our analysis was that if we could keep Ambassador Ford and our personnel there, our analysis was that that would help us to maintain contact with the Syrian people. We will now endeavor to do that from Washington. I think each nation has to make its own decision how best to support the Syrian people as we go forward.
Can you underscore the exact state of the relationship between Washington and Damascus? I've had people ask me, does this mean that relations have broken off? And I've said, no, but can you explain exactly what it means to not have a physical ambassador right there in Damascus?
We have suspended our diplomatic presence in Damascus. We have not broken diplomatic relations, and there's a difference there. Nicole.
Hi, could you tell us a little bit about what steps the U.S. might take next? What is Plan B given the failure of the resolution in the Security Council?
Well, I think the Secretary spoke to this quite fully in Sofia yesterday. She was asked the what next question, if you will, and she spoke about a number of measures. First of all, in a situation where the Security Council has been blocked from acting in support of the Arab League plan, in support of the defense of a democratic path for Syria, we're going to have to take measures outside the UN to strengthen and deepen and broaden the international community of pressure on Assad. So to continue his diplomatic isolation, to work with as many countries as we can to increase both regional sanctions and unilateral national sanctions on the Assad regime, to pressure those countries that are still trading with him, and particularly that are trading weapons or otherwise fueling his war machine, to stop. Secretary also spoke yesterday, and you've seen a number of other foreign ministers speak about the friends of a democratic Syria, those countries around the world that stand for a transition, that support the Arab League plan, doing more together to support a path forward for them, to provide what humanitarian relief may be possible. That's obviously difficult, but we want to look at that, and to provide political support for them. So those conversations are now going forward among the countries that might want to be part of this kind of a Friends initiative, and we'll see where that conversation goes in the coming days and weeks. Please.
Can I follow up on that? Will it be some kind of formal meeting of this new group?
Again, we're at the stage of consulting with like-minded countries and with the Arab League, and we'll see how this develops as we go forward. Still on Syria?
Yeah, Foreign Minister Lavrov will be visiting tomorrow Damascus. Do you expect any more hardened position, Syrian hardened position, or what do you expect?
Well, I'd obviously refer you to the government of Russia with regard to their expectations for this visit of Foreign Minister Lavrov. He did advise the Secretary that he intended to do this when they saw each other in Munich. Our hope and expectation is that Foreign Minister Lavrov will use this opportunity to make absolutely clear to the Assad regime how isolated it is, and to encourage Assad and his people to make use of the Arab League plan and provide for a transition and step away.
One more question, please. One more. Did you receive any signal from their embassy here that they may suspend their operation as well?
We have not.
How is he going to show the isolation of the Assad regime if he's coming to visit the government in Syria at a time when everyone else is running away?
Well, he can certainly make clear what it felt like to be 2 of 15 on the Security Council. That certainly speaks to the isolation. 13, as the Secretary made clear, both in Munich and in Sofia, 13 other members of the Council were ready to join this resolution from 4 continents.
They had China, that's over 1 billion people, so you already got 20% of the world population.
And
it's not complete isolation.
It's 2 countries from 2 parts of the world when the rest of the Security Council, representing 4 continents, was ready to support the Arab League plan and the Syrian people. Please.
Why have you chosen Poland to represent the U.S. interests in Syria? And could you elaborate on the role of Polish diplomats representing the United States?
Well, as I said, we are delighted that the government of Poland was willing and able to accept this responsibility. To my knowledge, it may be the first time that we've asked our ally Poland to be a protecting power for the United States. Poland maintains an embassy that is effective enough to take on this extra workload. They are a strong ally and partner of the United States. A protecting power obviously provides consular services to Americans in need, provides advice to Americans, and as necessary, if messages have to be transferred between us and the government of Syria in Damascus, they will be the transferring entity in that case, both from Damascus to us and the other way around.
So, Shoigu, you just said that you're hoping that when Foreign Minister Lavrov meets with the Assad regime on Tuesday, that he would deliver the message that perhaps Syria should go along with the Arab League initiative. If Russia took the time to veto it on Saturday, what did Lavrov indicate to Secretary Clinton that gives the U.S. the impression that he might actually say, you need to take a second look at this Arab League proposal? It doesn't seem to make sense.
Well, I'm obviously not going to get too deeply into the conversation that they had in Munich, which we described at the time as quite a vigorous conversation. I will say that it was clear from that conversation that the government of Russia also, as they've said publicly, has concerns about the escalating spiral of violence in Syria and about where this could lead, not only inside the country, but for the region as a whole, for Russia's relationship with the government of Syria. You've seen recently some public statements from Foreign Minister Lavrov and his people that they are not interested in protecting anybody in particular, that they are also interested in peace and security. So they have made some public statements about wanting to seek a political solution. Let's see what they can achieve.
I have a quick couple of questions. A couple of other world leaders over the weekend also talk about a contact group on Syria, or Friends for Syria. What's your understanding? Have you started any kind of a process to create this group?
Well, Nicole, I think, asked, and her colleague sitting next to her asked the same question a moment ago. And my answer to that was that this is an idea that a number of countries have been thinking about, of how the Friends of a Democratic Syria can work better together. And we're continuing to talk about it among interested countries, including the Turkish government. The Secretary had a relatively brief meeting with Foreign Minister Davutoglu in Munich about the way forward, etc., and we'll continue to talk about
Foreign Minister Davutoglu is coming to U.S. This week. Some say in Turkey that one of the topics will be buffer zone. Is there any way you can elaborate the issues regarding Syria?
Well, beyond saying that they always talk about Syria, and I expect that they will again, I'm not going to preview a meeting that hasn't happened yet. Please, in the back, still on Syria?
On this Friends of Syria group,
yeah.
Just if you can, could you be a tiny bit more specific just about who we're talking about other than Turkey and Great Britain and the United States?
Well, let me say, beyond saying that we have a number of European countries interested in this idea, a number of Arab countries interested in this idea, I think we need to have a little bit of time to work with partners and allies. But as we made clear, we had 13 out of 15 Security Council members thinking we need to do more to support the Arab League plan and a democratic Syria. In the absence of being able to work in a UNSC context, we have to clearly put together a group that can work outside the UNSC.
So what's the hope then for the Syrian people? We're seeing more video coming out of the crackdown in homes over the last 72 hours. How much longer do they have to wait for someone to try to help them against this government?
Well, again, Roz, this was the travesty, as Secretary Clinton said, of what happened in New York on Saturday. There is a plan on the table. It's a plan that would provide a very clear way forward, and it was blocked and vetoed in the UN. So the question becomes how we can continue to support the Syrian opposition in its effort to pull together its own plan, to work in a consolidated and unified way, to have its voices heard in a peaceful manner going forward, and how, if and as necessary, and it's very difficult now with the monitors unable to operate, we might be able to provide some humanitarian support. So these are all things we're going to look at, but also this issue of squeezing and pressuring the regime economically and by cutting off its arms so that the money that's fueling this war machine dries up. Please.
Would you support any move aiming to bring Assad before the International Criminal Tribunal?
Well, obviously he's going to have to be accountable for what he's done. It's going to be up to the Syrian people how that happens. Please, Nadia. Yeah, are we still on Syria? One more.
Are you considering
I
to
like
open?
the beard, I think. I can't tell
Yes,
from here yet.
from Syria.
Are we keeping it, or is it just a vacation hangover?
Till Assad goes.
Till
I think
Assad goes,
yeah,
wow.
yeah, I'm thinking about it.
Excellent, excellent. I like that.
Thank
I like
you.
that.
Are you considering to open virtual embassy or digital diplomacy for Syria since you closed your embassy there?
Well, again, we have a very active digital program with the Syrian people now. Ambassador Ford will obviously continue his Facebook page, his Twitter, his dialogue with the Syrian people, and we do that not only with Ambassador Ford but through the State Department platforms. So we have many, many ways to maintain our connections, as well as the connections of some of our other senior folks here in the department.
The nays are 155. Majority in the affirmative. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has agreed to the conference report accompanying H.R. 658, cited as the FAA Reauthorization and Reform Act of 2011.
Objection, 5-minute voting will continue. The unfinished business is the question on suspending the rules and passing H.R. 1162 as amended, which the clerk will report by title.
Union Calendar number 265, H.R. 1162, a bill to provide the Quileute Indian Tribe tsunami and flood protection and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? So many as are in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Gentleman from Washington.
Speaker, ask for the ayes and nays.
The ayes and nays are requested. Those in favor of taking this vote by the ayes and nays will rise. Sufficient number having arisen. The ayes and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
The last vote of the day on a bill that provides an Indian tribe in Washington state with about 780 acres for Olympia National Park to be held in trust for the tribe. Wanted to mention, in addition to live House and Senate coverage tomorrow, we'll hear Republican presidential candidates Mitt Romney in Denver and Rick Santorum in St. Charles, Missouri, as results come in from the Republican caucuses in Colorado and Minnesota and the primary in Missouri. That's here on C-SPAN tomorrow night after 10 Eastern. And tomorrow morning at 10 Eastern, Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke will testify before the Senate Budget Committee. We'll have that live on C-SPAN 3.
this vote, the ayes are 381, the nays are 7, two-thirds being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk a privileged report from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
Clerk will report the title.
Report to accompany House Resolution 539. Resolution providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 3581 to amend the Balanced Budget and Emergency Deficit Control Act of 1985 to increase transparency in federal budgeting and for other purposes.
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed. House will be in order. The House will be in order. House will be in order. Members, please take conversations off the floor. What purpose, gentleman from California, rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on H.R. 1734.
Without objection. Pursuant to House Resolution 534 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the consideration of H.R. 1734. The Chair appoints the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall, to preside over the Committee of the Whole.
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of H.R. 1734, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to decrease the deficit by realigning, consolidating, selling, disposing, and improving the efficiency of federal buildings and other civilian real property and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read the first time. The gentleman from California, Mr. Denham, and the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, will each control 30 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from California. Spend. The House will be in order. Members will please take their conversations off the floor. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, the purpose of H.R. 1734 is to shrink the federal real property footprint and save billions of taxpayer dollars by selling what we don't need and better utilizing what we keep. In fiscal year 2009 alone, the federal government wasted more than $1.7 billion in operating underused properties. Unfortunately, under existing law, solving this problem is not easy. The process is too cumbersome and congested with red tape. The administration has tried but realized it cannot achieve major savings without reform. As a result, H.R. 1734 includes a bipartisan solution to this problem, establishing a civilian BRAC-like process. However, unlike BRAC, the purpose of H.R. 1734 is to save money, and the Commission would have to recommend actions that would result in net savings. The administration believes there are several $billion worth of high-value properties that could be sold quickly, and I agree with their assessment. Federal real property has been on GAO's high-risk list for nearly a decade now, and our committee, which oversees public buildings, has seen the waste firsthand. The amended bill creates a 9-member commission that would review federal properties and recommend specific actions to reduce the federal building inventory and more efficiently house federal employees. The commission could recommend...
The gentleman from California will suspend. The House is not in order. I ask my colleagues to please remove their conversations from the floor. Members to take their seats. The gentleman deserves to be heard. Gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Commission could recommend property sales, consolidations, redevelopments, or other property actions. The bill does not apply to military bases, national parks and recreation areas, or a variety of other federal properties. The administration would have 30 days to reject the recommendations or force them to Congress for an up or down vote. If approved, agencies would be required to implement them. In conclusion, let me say that both Republican and Democrat administrations have tried to work within the system to get rid of unneeded federal property and have failed. Both parties know the process is broken and have proposed an independent BRAC-like commission to solve the problem. I believe this bill is a big step in the right direction, and I thank you for your consideration. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from the District of Columbia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks on H.R. 1734 and include extraneous remarks in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to H.R. 1734, the Civilian Property Realignment Act. Both Democrats and Republicans agree that we need a system to dispose of and consolidate excess federal property. I have worked diligently with the chairman for such a bill for most of this year. However, the bill before us does not reflect the bipartisan compromise I agreed to. Moreover, I have just learned that the President also opposes the bill, and apparently it does not even reflect a compromise among Republicans. I opposed the bill, this bill, in the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and it passed on a party line vote. The bill before us today is essentially the same bill that I opposed at the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee markup. Shortly after that markup, the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, on which I also serve, approved a bipartisan alternative bill by voice vote, which I supported because it did not have the issues I have with the bill before us today. Why was the Transportation and Infrastructure bill rushed to the Rules Committee on Friday and quickly brought to the floor today? Why didn't we take the time to craft a bill that could pass the House with bipartisan support and that stands a chance to pass in the Senate? Most importantly, Mr. Chairman, why isn't the bipartisan bill I agreed to before us on this floor this evening? When I testified before the Rules Committee on Friday, I indicated I would support the bill if the protections in existing law for the environment and the homeless were included in the bill. These protections are not included in the bill. The Rules Committee reported out a bill with no self-executing amendments. Instead, they made several amendments, including mine, in order for floor consideration. I could have done that all along. There are no assurances whatever that my amendments would be adopted on this floor. The only way to ensure that my amendments were included in the bill would have been for the Rules Committee to have adopted a rule that made my amendment self-executing and therefore a part of the bill before us today. I will not stand here today to support a bill I consistently opposed at Transportation and Infrastructure Committee markups on a hope and a prayer that my amendments will be adopted on the floor. I will not offer as amendments provisions I had every reason to expect would be part of the bill reported out of the Rules Committee, to offer my amendments separately is to risk, and greatly to risk, their defeat, while the bill before us, which I oppose, still passes. I will not be used to give bipartisan cover to this bill or to paper over a divide among Republicans. The subcommittee that I serve on had 2 excellent hearings on the creation of the Civilian Property Realignment Commission. I support the original bipartisan idea of assembling a Civilian Property Realignment Commission, but there are several portions of H.R. 1734 before us on this floor right now that do not reflect a revised bipartisan bill. I consistently attempted to make the needed changes to this bill, and they were unacceptable at the committee markup, at the full committee markup, and now at rules, where my changes were not incorporated into the bill on this floor today. As subcommittee ranking member, I was not informed that if I wanted the changes in the bill, I would have to offer my amendments separately in the floor. Who would have agreed to that as a bipartisan compromise? I have been consistent in offering amendments to this bill to eliminate the waiver of the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and the preclusion of a review of excess federal property for homeless service providers and other public benefit conveyances by the Civilian Property Realignment Commission that would be created by this bill. Curiously, the chairman now brings to the floor his own amendment concerning homelessness providers, which mirrors the homelessness section of the amendment assigned to me, but he does not include in his amendment the NEPA provision section of my amendment, to which he and I agreed in order to reach a compromise. The bill as it stands severely limits the review of federal property for a possible transfer to homeless providers and other public benefit conveyances by the Civilian Property Realignment Commission. By bypassing McKenty-Vento in the disposal process, the bill unnecessarily reduces the pool of federal properties available for transfer to homeless service providers. In these difficult times, extinguishing the right of first refusal for homeless providers would be a severe blow to a sector that has already had to contend with a huge downturn in charitable giving during the recent recession. The experience, moreover, with homeless service providers is that they take only the smallest properties, and I had already agreed to shorten the time period for providers to claim properties. Secondly, the bill, as reported, would waive the application of the National Environment Policy Act to some actions of the Commission, which I have always strongly opposed. Section 18B waives compliance with NEPA for the actions of the President, the Commission, or any federal agency when considering any of the Commission's recommendations, except during the process of property disposal and during the process of relocating functions from a property being disposed of or realigned to another location. It is important to carefully conduct the environmental review on any decision to close, relocate, or reconfigure a federal facility in time for the Commission to consider the full implications of its actions. The current language precludes a full review of the actions until after a decision to sell or dispose of a piece of federal property has already been made. This problem could have easily been fixed by including language that required agencies to submit information about the environmental conditions of a building and any information that the agency might have had about the potential impacts to the environment if a property was disposed of, consolidated, or redeveloped. Therefore, I must oppose the bill before us, and I urge opposition until a bipartisan base bill reflecting the issues I have discussed is presented on the floor. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just quickly in response, let me first say thank you to the ranking member of the subcommittee. We have worked on this bill for a year. We agreed on language. We accepted the administration's language and worked with OMB on making sure that this was a bill that not only passed with bipartisan support, but something that the Senate would welcome and the President would sign. So it's been a good year. We've, I think, worked very well together on the issue up until this point. And you know, I know that it became somewhat contentious in committee because we had several different properties listed in the bill to help pay for and make sure that this was a pay-as-you-go bill. We've pulled those out in an effort to create bipartisanship and make sure that those issues that the other side of the aisle wanted addressed were addressed. But we went a step further, and you know, as the ranking member of the committee asked for several different amendments, we agreed to those amendments. The environmental issue, we agreed to her amendment. You know, even though the OMB had suggested that they didn't want lawsuits to apply, we went ahead and in a sense of bipartisanship wanted to agree to the ranking member's amendment on this. As well, the homeless, we agreed to a $2 million exemption to make sure the homeless were well taken care of. That was changed to $3 million. We agreed to that. It was changed to $5 million. We agreed to that as well, even though I can't imagine the homeless wanting to utilize a $5 million piece of property. Seems somewhat excessive. But in the true scope of bipartisanship, we agreed. I keep my word. I will continue to support the ranking member's amendment on the floor today as well. I've included it in my amendment. I'll stand by my word, and I hope others on this floor would do the same. At this time, Mr. Chairman, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, the former chairman of the subcommittee.
Thank the gentleman.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank the gentleman from California for yielding. And I do stand here as a former chairman of the Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management Subcommittee who served alongside the distinguished delegate from the District of Columbia. And for the years I was chairman, we worked very well together. And so it's a great disappointment that I come to the floor tonight when we thought we had an agreement. In fact, we did have an agreement. The chairman of the subcommittee, the chairman of the full committee were willing to accept the gentlelady's amendment and put it into the bill, but yet here we are today turning this into a partisan bill, which, as I said, is very disappointing. And she said she couldn't come to the floor just on hope. She had more than hope. She had the word of the chairman of the subcommittee and the word of the chairman of the full committee. So I'm here tonight in strong support of the Civilian Property Realignment Act. There's immediate savings up to $1 billion a year this year alone and $15 billion over the next 10 years. It reduces the size of government. The Commission was tasked with literally reducing the federal footprint. And as we know, we have an example right down on Pennsylvania Avenue. The old post office building is going to be put up for a long-term lease, and we've got some of the premier hotel operators in the world that want to turn that into a first-rate premier hotel right on Pennsylvania Avenue, whether it's the Waldorf Astoria or the Marriott or the Trump Organization. They all want to take that and immediately turn it into a premier hotel. Construction jobs, jobs that are going to be in that hotel working for the long term. So it's really unfortunate that this bill is going to be made partisan this evening. It establishes a Real Property Commission. That 9-person civilian property realignment commission will serve for the purpose to consolidate the footprint, maximize the utilization of the federal buildings and facilities, reduce reliance on costly lease space, sell or redevelop high-value assets that are underutilized, as we talked about the old post office building. It reduces the operating and maintenance costs of the federal civilian real properties through the realignment of other real properties. It reduces redundancy, overlap, and costs associated with field offices, creates incentives for federal agencies to achieve greater efficiency in their inventories of real property the federal government has, facilitates and expedites the sale or disposal of unneeded civilian properties, and it assists federal agencies in achieving the government's sustainability goals by reducing excess space, inventory, energy consumption, as well as by leveraging new technologies. And as the former chair of this committee, we held hearings about the federal courthouses. We have overbuilt federal courthouses in many places in this country for years. For years we've done that, and this is going to take a step in reducing what we've been doing and consolidating, doing things that's appropriate and proper to save the taxpayers money. It takes the politics out of the process, provides for an expedited review and up or down consideration of the Commission's recommendations, just like the BRAC process. Congress would have the opportunity to disapprove of the committee's recommendations in block only, not in piecemeal, which is ensuring that politics will be removed from this process. Provides for one-time appropriations of $82 million to fully offset from the GSA's building and acquisition amount, after which proceeds for the sale will be used to repay the Treasury, plus give taxpayers...
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman. It deals exclusively with public properties. Military installations, properties deemed essential for the reasons of national security and national parks are not subject to this jurisdiction. So, again, I come to the floor tonight with deep disappointment in the ranking member who for so many years has worked in a bipartisan way on this subcommittee, yet tonight the text was available since December, so it's no surprise. The subcommittee chairman, full committee chairman, agreed to accept her amendment in its entirety, and most importantly, and something that's lacking in Washington today and lacking in Congress, is people not keeping their word, and the chairman of the subcommittee is keeping his word, which is extremely important in this whole process. So I urge all my colleagues to support H.R. 1734, the Civilian Property Realignment Act, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California reserves. Gentlelady from the District of Columbia is recognized.
I yield myself two minutes.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I hope the gentleman is not implying that I do not keep my word. And let me be clear what my word was. I would support a bipartisan bill, not that I would support the opportunity to offer amendments on the floor. The gentleman knows quite well that the NEPA amendment is an amendment that his side generally does not support. Let me be plain. They generally don't support this. The reason that the gentleman was willing to somehow come forward with what would appear to be a redundant amendment on homelessness, since mine already had homelessness in it, is because he wanted to separate himself from the NEPA amendment, and he knows full well that I would never support his bill without the NEPA provisions that I have spent months changing. This is a tragic collapse of what had been a bipartisan process until we went to Rules Committee. When somebody made it clear, and I don't know who it was, that this bill could be brought forward, the very bill I voted against, leaving it to this member to take her chances that that side of the aisle would support an amendment of the kind they have resolutely refused to support on the floor, but that she believed that because a compromise had been worked out with the chairman, they might on this occasion support it. I keep my word as well, and I yield to the gentleman from Maryland.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for how much time?
3 minutes.
I recognize the gentleman for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I thank the gentlelady for yielding to Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to H.R. 1734, the Civilian Property Realignment Act. Although I support the efforts to improve the process used to dispose of federal property, I believe that in its current form, this legislation inappropriately limits the access that service providers for the homeless have traditionally had to surplus federal property. Current law requires that all federal surplus properties be considered for use by entities that provide assistance for the homeless. This legislation would create a BRAC-like commission to dispose of unused federal property, would require a majority vote of this commission before any specific property could be considered for homeless assistance. This provision is misguided and should have been eliminated before this legislation reached the floor. I submitted to the Rules Committee a common-sense amendment that would have fixed this problem. My amendment would have ensured that Section 501 of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, which provides for the discounted conveyance of surplus federal property to homeless assistance providers, would continue to apply to all properties approved for disposal by the commission established by H.R. 1734. Unfortunately, my amendment was not made in order. There's no evidence that the current process for reviewing properties for use by homeless assistance providers has slowed property disposals. Indeed, more than 14,000 properties have been completed Title V reviews and remain on the government's books awaiting disposal. According to the National Center on Family Homelessness, the number of homeless children in America increased by more than 448,000 from 2007 to 2010 due to the financial crisis. Approximately 1.6 million children, 1 in 45 children, were homeless in 2010, a 38% increase over the level of childhood homelessness in 2007. With access to surplus federal properties, homeless assistance providers can provide housing, support services, and employment assistance to help the homeless get back on their feet. We should not make careless alterations to McKinney-Vento program. I understand the gentlelady from the District of Columbia plans to offer an amendment that would require the Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development to apply Section 501 McKinney-Vento to the extent practicable. If she does, I would support that. This is a step in the right direction, and I commend her efforts, but there should be no limitations on the size and value of the properties that should be subject to review for potential use by homeless assistance groups. For that reason, I cannot support this legislation so long as it contains provisions that would be harmful to the homeless and would reduce resources available to the homeless assistance providers. I urge members to oppose 1734. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady reserves. For purposes, the gentleman from California rise.
Mr. Speaker, just to reiterate one more time, I support the gentlelady's amendment. I look forward to voting on it as long as she brings it up. Support the homeless in this bill. We agreed to it in rules. I still support it today, and there will definitely be sufficient votes on this side of the aisle if she decides to bring it up. And you know what? If it doesn't pass, then vote against the bill. But if you believe in the homeless issue, then put your amendment up and let's have the votes on it. At this time, Mr. Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, also a former subcommittee chairman.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was a privilege for 2 years to be the ranking member of this subcommittee. And I will tell you that this subcommittee has never been a partisan subcommittee. And I commend Chairman Dunham for keeping that tradition of focusing on the issues, working with both sides of the aisle to try to get good products without getting into this partisan melee. And so I commend the chairman for continuing that tradition. He's done so in a marvelous way. And here's another example. He sat down with the ranking member. They worked out all these issues. The chairman actually went to the Rules Committee, testified in the Rules Committee in favor to make these amendments, the ranking member's amendments, so that they would be in order. Lo and behold, the Rules Committee did what both of them in a bipartisan way asked for. They allowed for those amendments to be in order. Now I have the highest admiration and respect for the ranking member. I've worked very closely with her. But I'm a little bit, frankly, intrigued. So the ranking member now says, well, if her amendments that the chairman asked to be made in order, the amendments that he supported, that he continues to support, that he says that he supported in the Rules Committee, she says if those amendments don't pass, well, then she would vote against the bill, so therefore she's not going to bring up the amendments. Excuse me? what usually happens is, heck, you bring up amendments even if the ranking member or the chairman doesn't agree with you. But if you have the agreement of the chairman of the committee, he's here again stating it, who has worked with you the entire process, the chairman of the committee helped you get those amendments made in order in the Rules Committee. They come to the floor and made in order. Here they are, ready to discuss. And then you say, no, now I'm not going to put up the amendments because if they don't pass, and then I'll vote against the bill. I agree with the chairman. Put the amendments up. If the amendments don't pass, even with the support of the chairman and the ranking member, and then there's good reason for the ranking member to vote against it. But to withdraw